Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Jason Lehman. Jason, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like we were connecting, I just want to start by telling the audience that, I came across Jason, his work with Why'd You Stop Me? I don't even know when, it's a couple of years ago, but, reached out, connected on social. And since then, we've been able to have some great conversations. We got to meet at IACP. He's down there for the Chiefs conference. So very excited to have you on the show for multiple reasons. But, again, just to reconnect and kind of hash out your story and be able to share that with the audience here.
I appreciate that. The bro hug you gave me when we first met was solid.
Oh,
So
man.
for those viewers who haven't had a hug from Eric, it's a solid, meaningful, deliberate hug. So it was great, bro. Thanks, man.
Well, thank you for propping up my bro hug. I will receive that compliment with great esteem. You're a big dude, and so I have like these long kind of orangutan arms. So I think that it worked out really well as far as like the hug, and right back at you, man.
Good.
Before we get into your work with Why'd You Stop Me? Obviously, it bleeds right in with your whole story, your personal story, kind of your origin story with coming up and getting into police work and your experiences there. So it is so impactful to hear about it. So if you could just like kind of walk us in.
Yeah. So I usually speak pretty slow, but I'm from New York, so I have a tendency to be a little bit loud. And if I sound funny to anybody, it's not me, it's you that sounds funny. So let's just make sure we clarify that right off the bat. But to quickly run through that story, I was born in New York City, New York, and I grew up a very fast-paced life playing in a playground that was actually built into my high-rise apartment complex because the park was too far for me to go. Growing up in that life, I got myself into a little bit of trouble. Some people might call it a lot of trouble. And my mother picked me up and moved me across the country to the state of California, where I found the game of football. And football is where I found the love for organized team sports that work towards meeting a mission and understanding a vision. I did that all the way up through college, where I had hopes of making it to the NFL, and those hopes didn't come true. Packed my stuff up. I was playing football at the University of South Florida, packed my stuff up, went back to California, which was where I was living through high school. Before I know it, I was in a bar fight. And the bar fight I was in, come to find out, was with one of the sergeants of the Long Beach Police Department's gang unit, a guy named Don D.C. Campbell. And, I don't want to tell anybody who won the fight. But when D.C. picked me up off the ground at the end of the fight, he mentored me through the process of becoming a police officer. I flew through that process of becoming a police officer, not flew through by ease, but flew through in times in this life timeline that we have. And I started realizing that guns, drugs, and bad guys was what I wanted to go after. And I was going to go after guns, drugs, and bad guys by any means necessary. Unfortunately, a few, and just a small few of the field training officers in an amazing agency at the Long Beach Police Department showed me the gray area, showed me a little bit about how I can operate outside of what is my desire. And at that point, not only was I doing what was said in some ways to be good police work, I was morally injuring myself. And I was doing things that I couldn't do in my regular life just because I had a gun, a badge, and police patches. And I got myself into a world of hurt. I got into a number of internal affairs cases. I was suspended from the job. I got myself into some horrific deadly force incidents. It just kind of turned my life around in a way I never thought I would have turned around, because I signed up, I took an oath, I wanted to protect people. And then these same people that I took an oath to serve and protect, once they didn't listen to me just because they were confused, I thought it was time to disrespect them. And we all know that a true leader shows respect to all individuals. Trust may be given in small pieces until it's earned, but respect is given right off the bat, right away. And it took me a while to realize that, because I thought that respect was earned. Now, mathematically, and I'm no mathematician, mathematically, that would mean that I get to show up. And until I hit that number that equals respect, I get to disrespect you. and that didn't work too well for me. And so there were a couple occurrences that happened in my life that led me to some aha moments, and those aha moments led me to recognizing that the best police work is when I'm working to get 2% better every day, when I'm working in an ethical manner, I'm holding myself at the highest, and I am recognizing that I was called not to be judged the same, but to be judged more harshly as a police officer than the normal person.
Hmm.
And I recognize that for me to strive to do things right, I have to strive for perfection to reach greatness. And I'm not ever going to be perfect. And police officers are absolutely going to make mistakes, and they should have some leeway in that. But we should always be trying to do our best. And so ultimately, I had a run in with a kid one day, and that run in that I had with the kid was inside of a classroom. And I can tell you more about that story, but I want to make sure that we respect time as well, and answer your questions. But that run in with that kid is what made me realize that there was a disconnect. And the disconnect is very easy for us to understand. And it doesn't just operate in the first responder space, it operates in all spaces. And you tell me if you believe this, Eric. We're very, very good at hanging out with people we like. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And we're
Yeah.
pretty good at hanging out with people who are in crisis when they need us. Would you agree?
Hmm.
But we're not very good in general at hanging out with people that are going to be in crisis before they're in crisis. Because
Yeah.
the people that are going to be in that crisis, we don't see value in most of the time. But most of the time, those are our most important clients in any business, definitely in the first responder world. The person that I see that's suffering from mental illness or drug addiction right now, as I drive past them as they're begging for $1 on the corner or maybe flipping me off, that person is the person that I'm more likely to see in crisis later on. But why in the world in the 21st century would I pull over and want to engage him? Think about all the risk, jeopardizing my career, getting myself into trouble, this fake idea that I'm too busy to give somebody 2 minutes of my time. All of these other thoughts are incredible and they run into my head. But the truth is, the reward is way bigger than the risk as
Mm.
long as I know how to strategically communicate. And
Yeah.
so that's what led to Why'd You Stop Me. Started out by training community members on how to teach them how to cooperate with youth and teaching them how to do that. To date, our company's trained 250,000 at-risk youth in difficult and resistant settings. And then it led to law enforcement training, which I could talk to you about if you want, but that's a whole nother story. And so
Yeah,
that's kind of
absolutely.
ultimately how we got to the position that we got to, is through a lot of failures. And people expect me to stand up on stage as a keynote speaker and speak about success, but that's not how we grow. I love bragging about myself and I love hearing myself speak. I'm not going to lie to anybody. But
Well,
the
welcome.
truth is, I have 2 ears and one mouth. I learn a lot more from listening than I do speaking. And I hope that the people that I speak to recognize their ability as being a leader, because the goal is to be as silent of a leader as possible. It takes a little bit of speaking to get to that spot, but that's really the goal, is to be able to go out there, interact effectively, work to influence people and work to build trust. And that's really how it works. So
Yeah.
that's kind of in a very quick nutshell how we got to where we got to.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love how you it's a crash course, right? And your story is compelling, and I didn't mean at all to be like, yeah, let's rush it along, but there's so much that I want to dive into with that, and for sure, talking about why'd you stop me and the community angle, but then also, hey, the law enforcement angle. And that's, I think, what made you stick out to me in the initial was, we all can talk about community engagement. We can all talk about explaining why we did something, but we're not so good at reflecting on how we can deliver that message so that it's best received. And then also not so good at putting ourselves under the microscope as culture, and a lot of dynamics with that, right? The defensive nature. I mean, we're supposed to be the authority. Like, we're supposed to be right all the time. But, I mean, you already hit on it, man. Like, we're humans. And, even when you kind of go back to the beginning, I think it is so critical to look at the foundation is you made mistakes as a kid, like we all do, right? And you had certain, reading about it, you had certain opinions about police, but then you were able to have an open mind and recognize like you could have value in this job. But then, as you depicted, right, like there's the ups and downs. Like, you're doing good stuff, you're doing not so good stuff because of things you learned, things that you absorbed, and then reflecting back into talking to a kid, right? That kid in high school that's like, hey man, like, this is my perception. This is why I didn't like our interaction. What do you think put you in the position where you were able and willing to receive that feedback and take this deep self-reflection to, I mean, literally everything that you've built and what you're doing now?
It's such a, there's questions that are shallow and questions that are deep and deliberate, and it's a very deliberate question, and I really appreciate it. As we think about this, there's two, I like to kind of call them aha moments, right? Two aha
Mhm.
moments in my life that brought me to continue my investigation. The first moment was when I got into a deadly force incident, and I had to chase a suspected drug dealer who was supposed to have a gun down a sidewalk right after he punched my partner, right past my partner's gun, actually. As I chased him down and got into this incident, I got him handcuffed, and I stood up and I took a deep breath. And I looked down and I realized that that man was no longer breathing. And it was at
Mhm.
that time, this being after, I hate to admit it, but probably 100 documented uses of force. It was at that time that I asked myself, what could I have done differently and what could he have done differently? And that's where I recognized the art and the importance of true debrief and the art and the importance of real preparation, the art of the start, right? Because what happens in between is a process, and that process builds the outcome. It's not the outcome that matters, it's the process which builds the outcome. So I could have unfortunately been a part of taking his life, but if any part of that process was messed up, I would have been responsible for that outcome in a bad way. And, I hate to say that anything positive about this event because it's horrific, but I had done everything in this instance by the book, within policy, ethically sound, morally correct, that I used the minimal force necessary to effect an arrest and overcome resistance in that way. And that was
Mhm.
unfortunate. But that process of me asking myself, what could I have done differently, was better than me just saying, oop, got through it. Thank goodness. You good? I'm
Sure.
good. All right, cool. Next one. That is where I think I realized that law enforcement could do so much better because policy allows us to be sometimes the professional prick and still be in policy. And sometimes we can
Mhm.
do it and not show true desire. And as I say this, you think about somebody that you have worked with or are currently working with right now. You see their name tag in a law enforcement uniform and you're saying, yep, that was him. That's Johnson. Yep,
Mhm.
that's her. Right? I was that person. And so I had to get out of that setting and recognize some more care. What really hammered it home for me was when I walked into a classroom. See, after this incident, I realized that the person that was under me handcuffed was the leader of one of the largest black gangs in the city of Long Beach, leader of the Insane Crips. And I realized that now there's going to be some people that are upset. And for the next 2 years, I went around and I policed ethically and morally. I'm past the time where I was kind of in that gray area, right? I had gone past that, and I'm doing things the right way, but I'm not. I'm still struggling a little bit, and I recognize that, hey, there might be, I get two different calls from two different confidential informants on two different sides of town. And I get these ideas that they may want to ambush and kill us in a park. And they had a plan. And to think that there's a threat out on your life is nuts. And so I walked into a classroom. Now, to back up a little bit, when they said they were going to get me, my normal reaction my normal reaction in any of us is revenge. Oh, you want to
Mhm.
get me? Eye for an eye. Let's go. I'll go get you, right? Well, I expressed that to a couple people at work and they quickly took me off the streets, which was really smart, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's not a
Mhm.
good spot to be working in a state of revenge or any kind of vengefulness, right?
Yeah.
So I get taken off the street. And law enforcement's a little bit weird in this sense that when there's an issue revolved around you, whether you're doing it wrong or there's a threat against you or whatever, the law enforcement entity only has the option of paying you to do nothing. It's
Mm.
really weird. So I'm in that position of getting paid to do very little, and I'm, what some people would consider kind of benched, and I get a call to come speak to a class. And when I go speak to this class, that second aha moment triggers. And it was in that classroom that I realized that there was something different that needed to happen. And that something different was for us to seek to better understand the people that our bias says are a-holes. and everybody sees them and everybody judges them. And it doesn't have to be a black and white thing. It doesn't be anything. I had somebody walk right past me and my wife today, and she was California. Drugs are pretty legal. And she was walking by and she was trying to sell me a meth pipe. So she had one meth pipe in her left hand, walking by, tried to sell me a meth pipe in her right hand. And I saw right off the bat a person that I did not like, a person that I thought bad things about. And I walked past her and I told my wife, we need to be safe in this situation, but I wonder what got her to that position.
Yeah.
I wonder what got her there. And that thought process allows me to still be safe, but it allows me to create time and distance to equal options, and allows me to seek to understand, to find the commonality that's going to keep us safe and reduce a need for force, or at least try to reduce that need for force. So that's kind of the way the thought process worked. And it was that time when I left the classroom after speaking to this group of kids, and the assistant principal said, "Man, that's great. What's the name of your program?" I said, "Well, they always want to know why they got stopped, so call it Why'd You Stop Me?" And that's legitimately how the name came to be. Now, the truth is, Why'd You Stop Me now tells us in leadership, from a leadership capacity, that nobody should be the you that's stopping somebody else. Even if we're going to conduct a traffic stop and impede somebody and take away that Fourth Amendment civil liberty for a second, which we're allowed to do in law enforcement, we should give them something in return. We in law enforcement should be the person that shows that we have something to give and not something to take. That's what real service is. When I lock somebody up, are they feeling like I'm giving them a position to try and reevaluate their spot so maybe they can make better decisions, right? When I respond to their home and I tell them that I can't do much, but I give them just a tidbit of information on what they could do, I'm giving them something, right? I don't want to be the coffee with a cop. I want to be the cop that brings you coffee, right? And that's really where that kind of came from. So that's what Why'd You Stop Me means to us now, is that our forward progress shouldn't get stopped. So those were the moments that brought me to this spot.
It's such a flip, because even in that moment where you're recognizing this like situational awareness, someone offering you a meth pipe on the street, but then you inject this notion of empathy, right? You inject this, hey, I wonder what it took for her to get here, because everyone can recognize, despite how cynical you may be in whatever stage of your career or station in life, that kids are innocent, right? Babies are innocent. So we all started from the same playing field, right? We all started with the same innocence. And then oftentimes, if you actually ask people to do the dive, like what got people in different bad situations or different situations growing up, they're going to say environment, right? Like, we can expand it past that into adulthood, and hey, we all make our own decisions. And I don't like writing off people's sense of ownership or accountability, but hey, like, let's look at it. And because you recognize very clearly, like, you grew up in a tough area, right? Like, so a lot of things of your foundational upbringing were different. They're just different. It doesn't mean you're going to be around, involved in crime. It doesn't mean you're not going to be involved in crime. It just is a different playing field. But I even wonder, like, what got you to the point where you can recognize that degree of empathy and then roll it in with this degree of safety and options, right? Because a lot of people wouldn't equate them in the same sentence. They might recognize responsibly, hey, we should have both conversations and we should have them play out in our heads, right? But in the same notion, I want to applaud you for that, because it is a little bit of a mind stretch.
Yeah, I think that the big stretch about it is, if we see somebody and dehumanize them, which is what is partially supposed to happen in academies. Part of our safety system is we're supposed to be able to dehumanize somebody to a very limited extent. But the majority of it, 99% of it, is to humanize that person and recognize, hey, they are someone beyond their uniform or condition. And that's what we want. I think that CIT, or critical incident training, or crisis management training, all that stuff is necessary. But the truth is, we should be treating everybody like our family member. And whether they can hear us, whether they can see us, whether they're have some kind of a special need, whatever it is, we should be treating them the best at all times. And if we treat them the best at all times, we can overcome some of the mandatory trainings that sometimes don't even help us. Sometimes they just frustrate us to an extent, right? It's just about trying to see the human. And that's one of our main principles at Why'd You Stop Me, is see the human. I can see the human. I can recognize if my brother's at 30 feet with a knife and he's sitting there wielding this, let's call it a machete. He's wielding a machete. I know I'm going to have my gun out pointed at him, but I'm going to talk to him to get him to put the machete down. And I'm going to do everything possible for him to put the machete down, because I know he's my brother. I know his name. I know about him. And so when I need him to put the machete down, I'm going to try every tactic possible, right? Seeking to understand. If it's not my brother, and I don't have that same desire to want to continue to build time and distance to equal options, it's a lot easier for me just to see this person as a dumb tweaker with a meth pipe, right? Just like what I could have seen today. A dumb tweaker with a meth pipe, and that pipe, that little bit of glass, that could really hurt me. So let me plan my shooting right now, because if she comes at me with a little bit of glass, that's the end of the world, and now I'm going to plan my shooting. And you and I know sometimes police officers have gotten to that level, and we really want to make sure that we recognize that if the person like my brother comes at me with the machete, I'm going to probably have to pull the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
But that is
Yeah.
somebody else's action, and that's me overcoming my bias and still making a decision that's a safety-based decision, right? And because I see care and concern at the same time. Another one of our principles is to be curious before we get furious. Our brain can't operate in both the same way. So if I'm mad, I'm showing up to the call because maybe it's the third call for service. I'm going to be pretty furious, and it's going to be harder for me to be curious, and I may make some decisions that I wouldn't have made with my brother on that first call or whatever. So I really agree with you. And I appreciate you recognizing that there's plenty of people. You do it. I do it. There's plenty of people out there that have this skill set. We just have to continue to develop it. You do, I do, all of us, because that's what successful people do. We take a skill set and we continue to develop it, because skills, especially leadership skills, are perishable.
Yeah, I love the curiosity, right? And shout out to Kelly Sarish. She wrote a book, Sharp Women, on situational awareness, specifically from that angle. But that's the thing, you could talk about situational awareness and self-protection, and then it could lead you towards paranoia. But rather, she injects, and you said it as well, right? Like, be curious, right? It's not to be irresponsible. It's to be hyper aware. It's to recognize all these inputs and senses coming in, but then you put it back out through this filter where you have to consider empathy. You have to consider the humanity. I like how you recognize the multi-layeredness, and I'll even inject more, right? Because for sure, if you don't have the humanity and the care aspect of what this job should be, right? People taking care of people, then we're at a loss. And if anyone's newly listening in, like, a lot of what I say is recognizing that I had my lower points when my empathy was not dialed in. I had my lower points when my training was not dialed in, because this could very much well be a thing, right? Because I'm going to use more force if I'm panicky, right? If I'm not squared away with my fitness or just my emotional regulation, like, these things will all expand out to what decisions I make, right? And how I make them. So I think it is a good degree of ownership, right? Because we in law enforcement, especially historically, are very familiar that there's a difference between reasonable and necessary, right? Reasonable, you could, it could be subjective. You could bring in all these different inputs and all these different people evaluating and be like, well, I mean, yeah, shoot, like, she had a piece of glass, you had to use some significant force. Yeah, that's reasonable. I could see that situation, right? But for an individual to really recognize necessary, like, no, I needed to do it to preserve my safety and that of the safety around me, and for me to do my job, and then potentially even protect her from the whole situation. Like, this is what I had to do based on the circumstances. I think, kind of like you said with the deadly force situation you're in, it's a tragedy, and it's not like you're trying to find this like silver lining, but you have to recognize some positives when there are that. I think in recent years, because of the high level visibility of a lot of unfortunate situations, it's forced us as a profession to really, really dial in what necessary is and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that when we think about this idea of necessary, there has to be a tool to evaluate fairness. And we're very, very good at saying we're fair, but ultimately fairness is proven on what we call the triangle. And this triangle has the rank and file officer on one side. On the other side of the triangle is the community, including the difficult ones. And on the other side is the administration, which now, whether you like to believe it or not, Eric, you're kind of falling into being a commander and all, because
I
you're
know,
not
I
putting
know.
your gun out too much, bro. So when you're in that
Mhm.
position, you have to be able to make a decision that you have prepared for prior to, on how you're going to answer those three, not during. During, I can't be in this situation where I'm pointing a gun going, what's the administration going to think? What's the community going to think? What are my peers going to think? Like, that's too late. we have to recognize what is going to be necessary by continuously running through some scenarios, not like super duper hyper vigilant, but just these scenarios saying, hey, how am I going to be able to process this when that
For
time
sure.
comes? And we have to do it more so now than ever before, because law enforcement is not responding to the number of calls for service that, as they used to in the past. And there's definitely less proactivity. So we have to make every single contact, which is a real scenario. We have to make every single one count so that when it is necessary, we can prove that it's necessary. And we have a 4-part system at Why'd You Stop Me that explains how to not only say you're fair, but to explain that you were fair in your decision-making process. And that's so important, because you really want to be able to say, yeah, it was reasonable, but it was also necessary.
Those are good points. And where I want to take it back is when you talk about the gray area, because I think it is good to make that differentiation. A lot of times we actually say, in my culture or my work group, like, hey, policing isn't black and white, right? Like, contrary to the color of the cars, like, there is so much gray area. There's interpretation, there's subjectivity, there's context dependent, right? So if you explain a scenario, I'm going to picture it totally different than how this person explains it or that person explains it. I like how when you kind of explained it more, you had talked about how you moved past the gray area into situations where you talked about moral injury. And I think that's a very relevant conversation that luckily is getting more traction as far as how we dive into that. Can you talk a little bit more on that moral injury piece for listeners that might not be as familiar, and then what you mean when you talk about moving past the gray area?
Sure. Yeah. And I think there's words that we use that take some time to define. I'm glad you brought that up, because there is some areas there, there's probably a million ways to skin a cat, but in law enforcement, we should probably stick to about 3 or 4 for each different call, right? We shouldn't be saying there's a million. We should kind of hone that down a little bit. And so, that gray area is an interesting part. But for me, where I realized that I was having a problem with moral injury is I was raised as a law enforcement. Now, I want you to know the academy at Long Beach, exemplary. The police department at Long Beach, exemplary. Leadership at Long Beach, exemplary. The FTO program, exemplary. But there's a few people, humans, that make bad decisions inside the agency, and it makes the community and members of the agency think the agency's bad, right? Like, I want to make sure I provide context, because there's 800 Long Beach police personnel that are absolutely amazing, and then maybe there's a couple dozen that are right at this moment probably not doing it right. And that's how it is for every agency I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was introduced to those few people, of the FTO teams, a couple of different FTOs that told me, hey, you treat people with respect as long as they treat you with respect. But once they treat you as an a-hole, you treat them as such. That means that I treat somebody with respect as long as they listen to me. But if they don't listen to me, then I get to not listen to them, be rude, be loud, be obnoxious, be aggressive. And I get to do all of it only because I'm wearing a police uniform. That's where moral injury sets in.
Mm-hmm.
Moral injury sets in because that was battling what my morals are as a normal human being. I didn't get to put a uniform on and disrespect. I got to put a uniform on and show more respect. I just
As
didn't
it
know
should
that.
be, yeah.
I didn't know that. And so that's where that happened. What turned around for me was when I was suspended from the job. I was suspended from the job around 2009. And when I got suspended, I had one of the chiefs tell me something that just crushed me. He said, kind of on a side conversation, hey, my daughter lives in this city. And if you ever get dispatched to go help my daughter, you'll know. Because in law enforcement, we have a broken system. We have so little trust in our officers across this country in law enforcement that when a VIP has a call for service at their home, a dispatcher calls a supervisor to warn the police officer to do it better than they normally would. That makes no sense. Nobody calls me before I'm going to do a traffic stop with 2 guys with guns in the car. That's VIP. That's when I really need to be on point, right? But they don't
Mm-hmm.
trust me to go respond to a call without a warning, and they don't trust me to go speak at a community meeting, right? Because I'm at this point just a police officer. Well,
Yeah.
he said, when you respond to my daughter's house, my house, and you find out it's my house, do me a favor. Let somebody else handle it. Turn the F around and go the other way. Don't go near my daughter. And that broke me. That was a point right there where I recognized this has to change. You know what I recognized later on in life? I was the reason why the supervisor has to call to warn the cop about the VIP.
Yeah, like a discrepancy in response, because you're right. Like when you even go back to, hey, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat or a million ways or whatever, right? There should only be a few ways, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so if these are the circumstances, these are the SOP, whatever you want to say, like
Mm-hmm.
within a range of response, it should look kind of like this. And then depending on what unfolds, then, it's going to kind of spiderweb into these things. But we're not going to be way out in left field. We're not going to be way out in right field. We should be able to expect that as fellow police officers. We should be able to expect that as community members, right? Like the circumstances don't justify this spinning out of control into this land. So yeah, I think that that's such a humbling recognition, right? Because again, I hope that those listening don't get defensive. That's why we have to have these conversations, because we've all had our times where it might not be something extreme, but we all have those times where we can recognize that our bias or our mood got the better of us, right? Or our pride got the better of us. If we didn't experience it in ourselves, we all know someone that had, contempt of cop, or, maybe wrote more citations because that person was whatever, right? Because they're acting a certain way, because they're being more difficult. Okay, there's a line there, right? And I think that it's really impactful to talk about that, because unless we are willing to recognize it, then we don't know like the better way. And you gave another great example where if someone isn't trusted to speak at a community meeting with 30 or 100 people, I mean, how is that different than speaking to 2 to 4 people on just whatever call? Like, your people need to be ambassadors of the agency and of the profession. And so if you have that wide discrepancy, then we got a cultural issue, right? Like we gotta make sure everyone is not fully in agreement. We're all different people, we all have different prerogatives, but we need to be aligned, and that speaks so much to culture and leadership of an organization.
Yeah, for sure. I think that when I really recognized that, that's when I realized that I wanted to empower police officers from before day one to realize they're leaders. I walk into police training rooms Monday through Friday, probably 4 days a week. I'm in a police training room or on stage somewhere in this country speaking to somebody. And when I ask how many leaders are in the room, it is horrific to see that rank and file officers do not
Mm,
raise their hand,
dude, yeah.
right? So it's a big deal to recognize that all of us have this leadership capacity, and we have if we want to be trusted, we have to give a little bit of trust, and that goes for police administrations as well. Look, this conversation could have been all about the fairies and butterflies of amazing policing all over this country, and we would have sounded just like a lot of other podcasts, and that would have been great, right? Hey guys, we're doing great. The truth is, American law enforcement is doing absolutely amazing, but there's better that can be done. And
Yes.
all of us, like you speak about those moments, we call them in training the 1 in 12. We've all been the 1 in 12, right? 1 in 12 lawyers aren't very good at their job. 1 in 12 doctors, 1 in 12 janitors, right? We're all human. We're going to have those moments. And to try and battle that 1 in 12 and show the 11 out of 12 how to help that 1 in 12 along, that's how we shift culture. We shift culture not from the single boss trying to make the culture shift. It's by us buying in the middle. It's that middle management spot, the FTOs, the sergeants, the commanders or lieutenants, right, that are sitting there able to create a culture shift. And there's no single culture that exists right now that should not be looking to get better. It does not matter. As a partner to Echelon Front, right? We partner Echelon Front. And as a partner to Echelon Front, I can guarantee you that Jocko Willink and Leif Babin right now are trying to make more money and improve their leadership and their success, their skill set right now, right? I was
Yeah.
just working with
While
some of the
while doing deadlifts and
right?
shooting
Yeah.
and
Burpees,
shooting guns
deadlifts, right?
offhanded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
up before the enemy, the whole thing. I was working with
Mhm.
Danny Ziem the last 2 days, working on a contract and a first responder contract. And we were out there teaching leadership, and we were dealing with a few folks within an organization that sat there and wanted to place blame on others. Well, for as long as we blame others and we point that finger, we have four fingers pointing back at us. And so we want to be able to recognize that. And that goes into a whole nother leadership talk. But the truth is, if anybody gets anything out of the conversation today, it's to recognize that pitfall moment and identify it and then move forward past, move up
Mhm.
and out. 2% better, keep on climbing, keep on growing, and keep on moving forward. because if we get so upset that somebody blames us, we're going to turn off. We have to, if a boss is talking to us in any organization, they're talking to us about what they thought was right most of the time. We
Yep.
should be able to say, you know what, boss, thanks. I really appreciate that. Thank you for showing me your way. I'm going to take that into consideration. Thank you. Let's move forward, right? And sometimes we don't do that.
Absolutely. And there's a couple nuggets I want to hit on before I forget. And one is that leadership piece, right? Like I think most people when they test, they do the initial oral boards, they would probably recognize, "Hey, I want to be a leader in the community. Like this is why I want the gun and the badge and the influence to do the right thing, to do the hard thing, to put yourself out there in even this physically dangerous way, right? You are a leader. People are looking to you in times of crisis." And you highlighted that at the very beginning. Hey, we're good at being around when someone's in like their absolute worst time. You're like, cool, this is what I trained for. But what about the innocuous time? So, I posted about this relatively recently from this recording, but a dude that I'm working with is trying to get hired, and he went to a candidate kind of engagement session, and he asked, "Hey, what are some resources?" Of the recruiting officer, like, "Hey, what are some resources to work on leadership?" And the guy's like, "Bro, don't even worry about leadership. Just try to get the job." I'm like, man, like terrible, boo, like bad, 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 right? Like to even tell these up and coming, this new generation that's going to do this increasingly difficult but increasingly necessary job, hey, don't worry about being a leader, just get the job first. Like, come on. So that's my first thing, before I move on. And the second thing is just, again, hopefully we're all on the same page of crooked cops, right? This is just like to look within yourself and be like, hey, where could you, in yourself now, in yourself yesterday, where can you make sure you're a better example, whether it's a line level leader, whether it's a, someone with rank, whatever that may be, like how are you going to show up better, right? Because the whole thing here, Blue Grit Radio, I am of high suspicion that the majority of people that are going to listen to my voice, like they're trying to get better, and so they are willing to have the uncomfortable conversations or listen to them. And part of that's like when I was pretty new, I got super sour and I was around a lot of really toxic individuals, and some of them have long gone my department, and others, I've looked at them, I talked to them, and they're in a totally different space, right? Partly because of their own maturity, partly because of the assignments they've worked, where they are some of the most positive people. But a couple one-on-ones later, I'm like, man, like remember years ago, like that culture, like what do you think helped it flip? And we kind of talk about it, right? And it usually comes to just maturity and then connection with people. And we recognized back in those days where, and I know this is not unique to anywhere, right? Where you have a cluster of officers. If one of them starts calling everyone in the public, an S head or this or that, it permeates, right? And then you start looking at this like us and them, and it sucks, right? When you have national situations that make you really feel like us and them. But those are the times where you gotta be emotionally introspective, be aware of where you're at, and be like, no, it's not us and them. It just feels that way. You got to drive back home to your purpose, why you do this thing. It's going to be the hard thing, just like when you signed up. But let's be honest, let's be patient, and realize, like, again, at the end of the day, this is people helping people.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really compelling to see the things that you're doing on social media to be able to help these folks out, and just to have, the to be brave enough to share that. It's so very vital because, I posted a comment when you posted that. I watched it because you didn't just you made a heartfelt video about it. It doesn't make any sense because leadership is the solution, and leadership is based off of relationships. And it's not just a relationship with the person we want to have a relationship with. It's the relationship with everybody, right? There's going to be a time I'm on my back at the intersection of Beach Boulevard and Talbert, close by where I live in Huntington Beach, and a lady holding a meth pipe might come over and be the first one to help give me CPR. And that's the same lady that tried to sell me a meth pipe today outside of the Mexican restaurant I was trying to go into with my wife, right? So it's really about us seeing past that and working to become better leaders and then become police officers. It shouldn't be vice versa. I shouldn't become a police officer and then learn how to be a leader because that's what I did. Like we should be learning leadership as we get going, and then we should be improving upon that leadership skill set as we get going. And then we don't have as much disparity between the guys you were talking about in the past, the ones that are long gone or the ones that had to make this big 180 change because of their experiences, right? It's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, and even when people reach out and they share their anecdotes and like, man, I'm with a really toxic group, then usually it's like, hey, focus on your locus of control, right? Are there ones and twosies where you're like, hey, like, well, let's roll together. You're more about what I'm about. Or if it's like really the prevailing culture, and if you can't right the ship, you're a line level, you're like a first line, and it's just increasingly toxic. Like, hey man, like that's going to govern how you do a lot of the job. So it might be time to vote with your feet, right? Because there are a lot of groups that are doing it better, right? It's not all in the same. It's like a different company. And yeah, we do have challenges and opportunities for growth in the profession, but certainly like some regions, some departments are doing it much better than others.
Absolutely. I think that when you look at it, you should be able to work to build a relationship with a skill set that you have until you absolutely realize there is just nothing there. And then it becomes very, very hard to sit in that space. And that's where it's really a challenge, is to sit in that space. I've had a couple of really good friends depart not only from an agency, but from law enforcement altogether. And I'm not recommending that, but it depends on a combination of your space and your ability to respond to events to build positive outcomes, and the space that you're being put in every day you go to work. You have to kind of have this weight of the two of them to recognize where you need to go in your position, right? Just one bad day shouldn't make you want to run away, and you definitely shouldn't make threats to run away unless you're going to, right? But it is interesting to see where law enforcement's going. And I think that the reason why we see some of the issues we see in the law enforcement space is because law enforcement and first responders, those agencies are the longest running and operating companies in the world. Coca-Cola hasn't been around as long as law enforcement. And there's been major entities shut down, right? Kmart's gone. Huge company, right? All of these different spots, they all happen because it is very, very hard to have longevity and be in an effective leadership based company. And that's what law enforcement and first responders are going through right now. So now it's time for us to make that 1 or 2% change, make that shift. And that's where we're separating one agency from another. An agency like Hermosa Beach PD, and I want to give a shout out to them. They have one of the best retention rates, and they are fully staffed, right? To be in Southern California right now, be fully staffed and have amazing retention is it's scary, but it's not as common as you would think. And so, to be able to see what's the magic sauce, what are you doing that is making that impact that makes people want to stay? And that's really where we separate those agencies.
Yeah, you talk about data and like proof in the pudding, right? So that says a lot, right? I don't know anything about that agency, but those are details that kind of scream out someone's doing something right, or someone's are, all, doing something right. I would suspect it has something to do with the culture that is initiated and given direction from the top, and then everyone's on board, right? It's everyone at the bottom buying in and being part of something positive. What is it that you see or know about that agency that's contributing towards that healthy culture?
Yeah, this is actually really good, especially for the young viewers to think about. Businesses that really want you know how to recruit you. And that's what Hermosa is doing. They are establishing a mentorship program where police officers that are currently there are mentoring recruits that are coming up prior to even being hired, I guess, applicants, right? And they have
Yeah.
this mentorship system where they're able to say, hey, if you have any questions, get a hold of me. If you need anything, get a hold of me. And that dead airspace that you have sometimes between your application and the time you're contacted, for big agencies, it could be, actually for any agency now, it could be months. And so that dead airspace, you're actually able to continue to say, hey, here's the update, here's what we got, here's a tidbit of leadership information, here's where we're going, and then connecting through social media is such a big deal. It's not just the touchy-feely social media, or which, by the way, has a very, very strong position and need to the community. But it's not just about the arrest. It's about, what? We care for our community and we care for our officers. I recently told an agency that I was doing some consulting work with, I was working with their chief, and I said, in your mission statement, why doesn't it say anything about the care and concern for your personnel?
Yeah.
Why is that not stated in your mission statement? You give me 100 mission statements, I'll show you 80 that do not say anything about the mission being to have care and concern for their own personnel. And if the
It's
mission
probably
is
more than that. Yeah.
right, if the mission is representative of the business plan, which in law enforcement systems it really is, or same in all first responder spaces, we should be having It's not hard to put five words in there, right? And to show care and concern for our personnel, right? So it's interesting because I think that's what it is. If you show that you have care and concern for the current personnel, you're transparent, you explain yourself, you answer the why right off the bat, and then you do a good job of decentralizing command and allowing others to lead on their own, right? Without having to call them because you're going to the VIP's house, right? Because that's kind of bothersome. Without having to give that warning, without having to do those things, and then the people hear about it and they say, you know what, I want to come, I want to do this job. It's very competitive in pay right now in Southern California, and I'm realizing that it's not a pay thing very much anymore. When it comes down to it, there's a smaller pool of people that want to do the job for a number of reasons, and it's time to go after them. Put our money where our mouth is in law enforcement. Spend money on recruitment, and it's not about putting a pop up at the next job fair. Dear law enforcement officer, if you got recruited at a job fair and became a cop, I love you, but you're a weirdo. I don't know very many good cops at all that just walked up to a law enforcement fair, career fair. Oh, I want to be a cop now. That it's long-standing relationships. I hate to say it, it's social media so much more than it's that career fair, right? And then you just start making those connections and that mentorship. So I think that's where the difference is being made.
A couple prongs there, just because I came recently out of hiring, but yeah. The secret sauce is there's no secret sauce. And that's where we found so much of our success was me and my recruiter were just like abundantly available, right? And to build that mentorship, we're like, hey, and true to form, like you can find people that they will attest that I mentored them into getting hired somewhere else. Like it wasn't always the plan. Sometimes
let's not talk to the chief about that.
Yeah. So yeah, no, that's the thing. But at least we've been hovering around full staff for the region, which is amazing. But like, no, that is the thing. Like we said, and I was like, you guys are going to call me on it, or the other recruiters are going to call me on it, but I just want more better cops everywhere. I want more good people becoming good cops. It's like, if that happens in not the city I work, Kent, then that's still a win, because guess what? I don't live in Kent. I don't always shop in Kent. My mom doesn't live in Kent. So all these things, all my friends, they live in Seattle. If I can help people get hired in Seattle that are great people, then so be it, right? That is the goal, right? Better community. Like, I'm not just responsible for my agency and who's paying my checks. Like, I'm responsible to this profession. And because I found this outlet, I found this opportunity where I can be effective, like, I'm going to keep working on that, right? I'm going to keep doing what I view as my part because I have something to say and someone is listening, right? Even if it's Jason just today. But truly, like, there is no secret sauce.
I'm listening, bro. I'm listening, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. But yeah, even just talking about, as you broke it down, the recruiting thing, I will say we did pop up everywhere. We'd go to job fairs. We went to non-job fairs, just community events. But that's where, to your point, some people do show up at the job fair, but just because they're extra, right? Like, they already applied. They know what to do. They know the information. They have the website recited, but they find out that you're there and they're going to come meet you. And like, they did stand out. And so we've had some fantastic hires and a bunch of people that I know that went to those. But yeah, like, not just a rando, like, I never really thought about policing before. But I will say, like, just doing community pop-ups, like, hey, you're going to have cops everywhere at community events. You got to embrace this notion that community engagement is the same as recruiting, because it's people getting to know you. It's people coming up and asking about the job. What do you think? What are you struggling with? What do you like about it? And you need to recognize that all your people need to be advocates for maybe not exactly what the job is right now, but why you're in it, why you stay committed. Like, we might not all be happy about the state of affairs and the legislation or judicial, whatever. But for everyone that's still wearing the badge, you're doing it for a reason. And we shouldn't be hiding like what that is, right? People want to know. They want to connect with you. They want to empathize with you. And so we have found a lot of success in just being out and about. And some people think that there was some weird system that we were doing just to get people hired. I actually kind of got called out by a neighboring agency. They invited me in to talk to their recruiting team, and I was like, yeah, I'm happy to do it. Did it on the clock. My administration was supportive. Yeah, go help our neighbor. And I go, and the captain's like, so I think it's a little interesting that when we have someone apply, then they're already reached out by you guys. And I was like, if you're insinuating some kind of weird algorithm or like some kind of hacker thing, like, I am not that smart.
You in
maybe.
Russia. Let's go. Let's make it happen, man.
Yeah.
Jeez,
And
or
I was like,
China, or whatever you want it to be.
yeah, did I
Golly.
just get called in to be accused? But anyway, that's how it goes sometimes. But hey, man, so I do want to focus back in on, why'd you stop me and all the work you're doing? What are some things that you would impress and you'd invite and challenge law enforcement today, whether you're the rookie coming in about to get ready for academy, or whether you're mid-career and you're like, man, I got my good days, I got my bad days. Like, what are the big things that you think are going to be most helpful?
Yeah, it's interesting because first of all, our training system will go anywhere, and I say that because we are right now the training system that is empirically proven through evaluation data from thousands and thousands of police officers to be the most recommended communication training by peers to their peers. And they're being forced into this training, which is such an honor for me to brag about. And we'll go anywhere in this country to provide training to law enforcement. But here's a 4-part system that you can take with you every single day, and we're going to give it to you for free right here. The system looks like 4 legs to a table. So as I explain this, I hope that your viewers and supporters are listening and thinking about what 4 legs to a table would look like: equal size, equal shape, equal strength. And on top of that table is the tabletop. Right on top of that table is fairness and relationship building. When we break down on a bad day, which is easier to break down than on a good day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those not we have 9 indicators of rage, and those 9 indicators of rage are a lot easier to trigger when we're not doing too well, right? When we keep these 4 legs intact, we're going to be solid on any day. Brand new guy, tenured officer, command level, rank and file. So here they are. The first one is to give people a voice that's bigger than yours as long as it's safe to do so. You'll learn a lot that way. The second one is to treat people the way they want to be treated and engage the platinum rule, which is different than the golden rule, which is treat people the way you want to be treated. Because you can't show up with somebody in their time of need and treat them the way you want to be treated if you don't know they want to be treated like you. So seek to understand and engage neutrality. The third one is to prove that you have respect for somebody's heartbeat beyond their words, their actions, and their uniform. Respect the human heartbeat. If you respect the human heartbeat, you'll get past that lady trying to sell you a meth pipe without acting on the fact that you think she's an idiot. My bias tells me she's an idiot. I got to get past that. I got to get past that and see the human. And then the fourth one is to build trust. But there's two big things in leadership. Number one is for us to earn trust, we have to give a little bit of trust. Got to give a little bit of trust away to earn trust. And when we want to influence somebody, and this is super important, and in our hardest times, we have to let people influence us. When we let people influence us and they feel like they have influence over us, we're going to influence them. So if you use voice, neutrality, respect, and trust as a 4-part system, and you brief and debrief with those subjective thoughts in mind, you will always be able to prove fairness, and you'll always value process over outcome, and it'll help you get through those tough times because you'll be able to better detach from those emotions that get you kind of riled up and get you moving forward in a very positive way. So that's what I would say. I would say implement that our system of procedural fairness. Some people call it procedural justice, but it's not looked at the same way as we explain it. And go out there and keep working on getting 2% better. And you can measure each day whether you did better or worse. A lot of people say you can't. All you have to do is implement the 10 F's principle. And those F's are looking at were you better or worse with your food? Better or worse with your finance? Better or worse with your friends? Better or worse with your fulfillment? Better or worse with your faith? That's how you see each day whether I got better or I got worse, right? And if anybody wants those 10 F's, they can reach out to me in our company, and we'll email those over right away if they want to check them out. They're 10 F's that we stole from one of my mentors and one of the co-founders, Alexa Pool Gordon Graham, which we do a lot of work with. So,
Dude, I love that. So many people can recognize, like, if you said 4 or 5 F's, they'd probably rattle them off. And I love that there's 10, right? Because even fulfillment, right? A lot of times it's like family, friends, faith, or family, finance. And like, so these are undeniable tenets that relate directly towards your personal, your family, your team well-being, right? And so, man, if you didn't just rattle in right into that, which is so impactful and helpful, that was the mic drop moment. When you explained the 4 table legs, because if we could truly train and enhance and encourage everyone to put life, not just their career, but life through that filter, would we not have significantly fewer problems? We'd be basically all the way there, right? As far as empathy, EQ, the decentralized command, a little shout out to, Jocko and Leif,
Yeah, you
right?
better shout them out. You can't
I
steal their
know
stuff, bro.
they don't need the shout out, but where it's due, credit where it's due
Yeah,
for
no, they're
sure.
awesome. They're awesome.
Fantastic. But yeah, thank you so much, man. It's such impactful conversation. I know everyone that listened in will get a lot from it. And please, if you could tell the listeners where they can find you, more about your organization.
Awesome. So I think that both business and personal, they hopefully for me, they mesh because I don't want to have to turn into somebody else that I'm not when I get into business. So I'm going to give you guys my personal social media and I'm going to give you my business social media. My personal one is Jason Lehman 64. And if you're not looking at the show notes or you're listening to, listening to this on the podcast, Lehman is spelled Lehman 64. And then the business is Team Wisdom, and Wisdom is the acronym for Why'd You Stop Me? So Team Wisdom. If you want to talk to us or chat with us on our website, it's wysm.org. And like I said, to train community or police, we will go anywhere in the world to make an impact. And you can email us at info at wisdom.org. And Eric, it has been an absolute honor and a privilege to be able to engage with you and to talk to anyone that could convince somebody to become a Seattle police officer right now. That's a big win, bro. That's a big one. For us in Southern California, it seems like not many people want to work in the city of Seattle. So I'm probably wrong,
Well,
but that's a big win, bro.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Seattle, sub-Seattle. We're in a suburb, outside of the city. So It is different. Same county, but the struggles are real. For the region, but my heart goes out frequently to, our brothers and sisters up in Seattle because it is a different animal. But I know some good people that are getting started there. So they're doing what they can, fighting the good fight.
Yeah, can't hire everybody. I mean, no matter how much you guys want to work with Eric, you're not all going to go there. There's 18,000 agencies in this country, so you might not all get to go work with Eric. So
yeah.
Well,
thank you so much, man.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much. Hopefully, we'll get to chat again soon.
Absolutely, it's going to be good to see what you keep working on.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.